Give you an example, Hawaii has a very, very specific list of algae species that are allowed in the state that are considered indigenous to the state, and only those are allowed to be grown in the state. You know, if we are going to introduce for production a new GMO, even if it's a genetically modified species of one of those indigenous strains, we'll need some of those regulations changed. And that, I think, we'll have to see all across the nation.
There's a piece in the paper today about the Gulf oil disaster. And one of the points the article made was the federal government apparently simply wasn't prepared for a disaster of this magnitude. How much effort goes into disaster thinking with regard to genetically modifying algae, using algae, exploiting algae? Does anyone spend any time thinking about what can go wrong and how do we prepare for that?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, and I think that's why within the NAB consortium and some of the centers that Dr. Sayers is helping lead, we are addressing crop protection as one of the risk management components. Can we develop a strain of algae that can only grow under certain conditions? Once outside of those conditions, they just can't survive any further because there's a particular chemical required in order for that algae to continue its lifetime, or a particular pH or temperature range, or a mix of those things. And I think that risk management needs to be there in the cultivation system, whether it's open or closed. I think that's correct.
I might add, though,
Sure.
that many of the modifications we're making, even fast growth and enhanced oil production, in a real-world competitive environment, are going to make these algae less fit than the natural species that are currently in the environment. As an example, I mentioned we're changing the size of the antenna to optimize it for harvesting light at very high light intensities. Well, that'll work fine in that situation. But when algae settle through the column of water and they get into very dark zones, those algae will be at a competitive disadvantage relative to the wild algae that are growing there. So I don't think we'll expect to see a super algae taking over the world. That scenario is very unlikely to happen, particularly with the biocontainment safety strategies included. And so I don't foresee any major problems at the present time.
Does the same organization both support and regulate, or are those functions divided by the government?
From a governance for our organization currently does not get into a policy component as far as regulation. It is something that we are very, very interested in, though, in helping influence. And the way we hope to influence it is obviously by education, making sure that we bring good science-based education to both our policymakers and our population, such that those decisions are properly grounded.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not sure who the question's addressed to.
Regulatory factors?
Yeah.
Definitely strengthen them, because at the present time there are no regulations covering algae that are GMO. It'll help the industry to have a body of regulations that they can respond to appropriately and set standards for operations. So we're trying to work, hopefully, with those agencies that will be developing the regulations in the future.
And presumably you'd be better off with a uniform set of regulations from the federal government than with 50 different sets of regulations from the states.
Very much so, but you know.
You take what you get.
You got to take what you get, and what you're hoping is that they will they will one will educate the other, and will actually see them into a congruence flow of the regulations being very, very similar.
Okay. Yes.